Alright, there's a very good chance I have to cut out early of this one. In fact, I should get my stuff ready for when I do have to cut out. Computer will run slow because I'm recording. Apologies if this ends up being a messy video. This is game 6. We've had 2 neutral games and 3 games very much in Turdz' favor. They are both running back the same hands, and we have started to see some patterns of starters that we may see repeated. For instance, in the prior game, Turdz met Turdz played 379A in 9, and Stuff played Una, FFX2 Una, the big corner. Stuff has tended to play big corners in 1. And in the game before that, Stuff started in 1, and Turdz met it with 379A and 9. So they've clearly found the corners they kind of like with their hands against the opponent's hands. And I think there is a decent chance we see Una in 1 here, or Larsa in 7, the other naturally supported large corner. And I think there is a very good chance that is what we see. And I'm gonna pause for a bit while I set some other stuff up, and we'll come back when we see a move, because I've been really lazy about analyzing early move possibilities, and well, let's keep the pattern going. And also, I have to make sure I'm ready to abandon ship in 20 minutes. All right. All right, we're back. Nothing's happened yet. I do think it's interesting that we've sort of seen the players lock in on hands. I think from Stuff's perspective, the last 3 games have clearly gone better for him, even if the last one was very dangerous. And it makes sense for him to stick with something that has been working better. He's had, 2 neutral games. From Turd's perspective, like, the hands match up well, and he's coming really close to winning. Again, I would be doing more tinkering, I think, from both sides, but especially from Stuff's. I think it's more incumbent on Stuff to make some kind of change than it is on Turdz, right? Turdz is naturally lined up better against the corners, has a clearer plan, and it is Stuff who is kind of having to scramble each game to make things work. And he's done a great job scrambling, but it is clearly difficult. So there's a fairly good chance we see 379A and 9 again, which we saw in the previous game. Stuff then played in 4. Turdz played 9A, 3, 7, and 6. But here it's going to be harder for Stuff to play in 4 because Turdz, of course, is a threat in 2. And it is relatively easier for Stuff to play in 2 because Turdz' threat in 4 is weak. But if Turdz still has 9A, 3, 7 in his hand, then Stuff's counter combo to 4, because A4, 5, 9, and 4 can be comboed back by Una in 7. That can get comboed back by 9A, 3, 7, and 8. And then they have to do some work making sure there's no combos at the end of it, or having explicitly set up so there will be combos at the end of it. I, however, shall not do that work. But Turdz is not committed to this. For instance, because Turdz has coverage both ways, especially good coverage in 2, you could think, okay, maybe I should set up better 4-7, right? And so I think we could see a move like maybe Vanille in 7, which says 6886 now has both sides of your starter. None of your cards are particularly happy to see Vanille in 7. In fact, your only capture of it from 4 is with Ayla, which I combo back through 2. And if you try to deal with Vanille from 8, that probably gives me like Lock in 9 as a safe and happy response. So I think Vanille in 7 could be, like, we've tended to see opposite and big corners rather than setups. But I think it is possible this is a moment where we see a different direction of play. And one of the reasons we've seen more of these opposite corners than setups is because so many cards in the hand are such clear corner cards, right? There's not many cards that like you don't have many like side to side cards that are going to be easy to set up pluses with, right? Like if you wanted 379A to have a plus in 4, you'd have to put another 379A in 7, or a plus or same. Now you could start with 379A and 7 instead of Vanille, but I think 379A has a lot more play in the resulting position. I think if the left side is filled up, Vanille is a kind of dead card, and also it's somewhat annoying to take back. Very annoying to take back. So Vanille in 7 is the move I would consider in 7. What would be moves to consider in other squares? Well, 379A and 9 is a just decent chance to happen because that is how this match has gone. But I would point out A4, 5, 9, and 9 is currently safe, but it does give up the threat in 4. So if you played A4, 5, 9, and 9, you'd have to check two things. You have to check, is there some setup in 5 I don't want to see? And the answer is no. But you also have to think, do I have a reaction I like if they go in 2? And that can be complicated to figure out because it's not clear what card would go in 2. But I would suggest you probably do have reactions you like to 2. For instance, if they play a 9 down, you might consider 3, 7, 9A, and 6, setting up the same in 5. And again, you don't really need to set up 3 that well because 3 is an inherently valuable square. So maybe something like lock in 9 makes a bunch of sense here. Again, it's been very easy for these players to run out of power in given directions. And so we often see, one of the other reasons we're seeing so many opposite corners is whenever a corner is played, it gives up value in an opposite direction, and that can come at cost. And both players, I think, have done a nice job trying to exploit that. I'm going to pause again, and we'll come back shortly. Sorry for the scatteredness, but I do have to leave in, all right, we see none of the moves under discussion. Instead, we see a move that Stuff has an easier time taking, but Turdz has an easier time taking back, and we can see his point. Stuff has given up a lot of rightward value, and now his only capture in 8 is Larsa. And if Larsa lands in 8, that's very easily comboed by Turdz. Right, Turdz has made sure to have cards that have good play against Larsa, which I think is very logical. Now, Stuff does have a nice capture in 6, but Turdz has not given up any of his attacks against 1, and it's really easy for Turdz to recapture in 8 with Vanille. So I think, if Stuff makes some kind of passing move, one thing Turdz has done, and I think this can be a really cool effect that's hard to find, is, Lock is safe when it lands, right? So you could play Lock immediately, but if you can land Lock a turn later and find another way for a card to have use, Lock probably is still going to have use, right? So, if Stuff somehow passes the move, Turdz plays Lock in 6, and suddenly Lock is safe, and that blocked all the attacks from 6, of which there was 1, but it was a good attack, with 8, 6, 7, 8. And suddenly it's hard for Stuff to take things or attack things. It's not clear where his play is. One downside to this is that Larsa really can potentially play well. And we saw this when looking at the winning variation in the last game briefly. But anytime Lock lands in 6, all of Turd's cards that could land in 2, primarily 6, 8, 8, 6, suddenly set up Larsa in 5 so well. And so there are ideas where if Stuff, say, plays in 4, and Turdz is played in 6, it's really hard for Turdz to actually go in 2 as long as Larsa is around. And so Larsa is quite decent chance to be a sufficient sweeper here to control whatever happens. Really bummer we have Delial sped players because, again, I am running out of time. So I'm trying to make sure everything's up and I want to get this game and whatnot. Where would we go if we're Stuff? There is a case, of course, for going in 2. I think one thing is if Turdz goes in 2 and 6, it sets up Stuff. But if Stuff goes in 2 and Turdz goes in 6, it probably doesn't set up Stuff. His cards do not naturally line up against that 9. He needs Turd's cards to do it for him, which is part of why the key lines in the last game were so hard to see, is because it is easy to see setups using your own cards. One of their cards and the rest of your cards, you can find setups. It is hard to find setups where you oblige your opponents to use cards from their hands that happen to set you up at the end. That is like a much more difficult task, and it is why some of the really cool moves in, TT history have involved setting up things entirely based on your opponent's cards. And we saw a bit of that last game when 9-8-3-7 for Turdz was so able to sweep some endgames, though not as many as I thought, because again, I miscalculated all of that endgame and did not realize just that Turdz wasn't quite comboing enough cards back. But yeah, those can be some of the coolest setups. All right, I'm gonna pause again to send out stuff for this meeting I have to do in a few minutes. But hopefully we'll be back and catch at least one more move of this game. Okay, hopefully all that will take care of itself now, and we have 6 minutes of action. We know stuff is drawn to Larsa in 7. We know he has also defended the strong side of his corner. He has quite rarely attacked Turdz's corners, and here it doesn't seem very appealing. And he has quite rarely played setup corners. He has tended to favor strength over activity is the wrong word, but over kind of setup potential. I thought I was going to mention this last time. I think I started saying this and then got distracted, as is my want. Stuff did say in a game, in private, and I think this is fair to share, that he thinks this series will open up once someone risks playing in 5, because that allows for much more potential in kind of all directions, and that it's been, these are now my words, not his, but that it's been a lot more sort of corners and working around the corners series than one where there are big setup potentials and activity there. Now, I kind of think that's in a way true, but looking at certain players who I think play very combative, exciting setup triple triad, and looking at their tie rates, their tie rates actually tend to be quite high, relatively high at least. And also, if you look at Joker and Spade, 2 of the bots, they're not the most human, but this is a somewhat objective test. Joker plays a much more, oh no, if I lose internet, okay. Joker plays a much more setup-y style, where Joker goes in 5 much more often. And Spade plays a very set up a big corner, defend around it style. And they have very similar overall like win-loss ratios and win-tie loss, like win rates, right? But they actually have really different tie rates. And one of the things going on there is Joker wins less and loses less, but plays a much more combative style. And I think this has been one of the weird conclusions about Triple Triad, is that defensive, less combative styles actually seem to have more decisive results, both in human and in human versus bot play. And I think if we look at these corner-based games, a lot of them have been, really combative. I'm expecting Loki in 6 here, by the way. It sets up Turdz's Vanille really nicely. And while Turdz doesn't have 4, and has to spend some time considering 4, because of course, like, one critical line here is lock 4. I might have just said Loki. I meant lock. Lock 4, Una 7. There's no 9-8-3-7 to cover that. So it makes a lot of sense that stuff blocks 2 here. But I do think the cards just line up well for Turdz. So for instance, if lock 6 rather than lock 4, lock 6, like, where's the plan? Where's the move? Now, as we may have picked up from last game, Larsa 8 there becomes somewhat possible, because 8-6-7-8 landing in 5 has some combo potential. So it's not like Turdz can necessarily combo from 7 immediately, because 8-6-7-8 hits back pretty hard. So there is some potential to keep it tricky that way. Some serious potential to keep it tricky that way. But I think Turdz should be able to hold the squares open long enough that it goes in his favor. Because 8-6-7-8 doesn't have any other squares. So for instance, if lock 6, say Larsa 8, say Turdz just played like 3-7-9-8-3. Now it's hard for stuff to go 5, because Vanille lands in 7, and through Larsa combos so much stuff, and it doesn't look like there's a combo back. and it's hard to go in 7 because then you have no reaction to Vanille landing in 5, right? And if you go in 4 trying to keep open both, you don't have a square that can go in card that can go in both 5 and 7. Yuna is good in 7 and 8, 6, 7, 8 is good in 5, but it doesn't look like you have both. So I think lock in 6 is pretty dangerous here and an appealing option. And I don't love other options, right? Most things in 3 can be met by Larsa in 6, and there's no combo in 5. That should be pretty safe for stuff, I think. If Vanille in 3, it doesn't flip 2, and that's going to be a somewhat tricky card to flip later, so it's at least some cost of not flipping it. And also that gives up your best recapture in 8, so suddenly 8, 6, 7, 8 landing in 6 seems really appealing for stuff. It doesn't seem like you have 4, because you don't set up 5, so they combo back in 7. There is 8, but I have no idea why you'd ever prefer 8 to 6 here. I think 6 is fundamentally a better structure. It's easier for you to set up 5 from 6, and it's more important to block 6 than 8 because stuff is the better capture there. So I would be really surprised if we don't see 8, 4, 5, 9, and 6, not just because I think it's the best move, but because I think there's some gap. I think one of the reasons, so Turdz has had 3 winning positions, but in all his winning positions, he had a lot of moves that appeal. And I think those are actually really hard positions to win, right? If you have one good move and 12 terrible ones, you're going to look at the good move and you're going to play the good move. Like, even if the good move is kind of weird, if every other move is unappealing, like, you get there by process of elimination. But if you have like 6 good moves to look at before you get to the like actually winning but like hard to find, like it's 7th on the list move, it's very easy to have convinced yourself that one of the other 6 is winning, or to spend so much time on those 6 because they're all really appealing that you never get to the 7th. And I think that's been the kind of situation we've tended to have, where stuff has done a really nice job of making sure something logically is working for him in the position. And that is just enough to give him pretty good defenses against most of what Turdz can do. But all of what Turdz can do is still really appealing, and that makes it really hard to differentiate the key move among those appealing options. So the computer might have just went weird. It just said CPU percentage, which is normally about 23.5%, just went to negative 3,000%. Oh, and I have to go. Okay, I have to go. We'll wait 1.5 minutes. We'll see the move, and then we will stop, and maybe I will splice this together with me doing some other graphic for the rest of it. Though if this ends up being a tie, I probably won't. And we'll just cut the video here, and we'll have 20 minutes on basically moves 2 and 3 of this game. That's fine. Your problem, not mine. But I really think we're going to see lock in 6 here. And then the question is, can stuff hold yet again? Because I think this should be good for Turdz. I don't see why it wouldn't be favorable for Turdz. And the question will be, can stuff find yet another really good defense? I do think, and I just keep saying this, I do think Turdz's hand lines up better with stuff's. I'm not sure that stuff is doing anything at all, like, significantly wrong to be getting in these tough positions. I think it's tough. I think the hand matchup is just difficult. Like 9A3-7 last game was such a sweeper because it just lines up really well here. And okay, we do see lock in 6. I do have to go. We'll see what happens here. I think this is another press for Turdz, though there was a game I thought looked initially dangerous for stuff that he very comfortably shepherded to a tie, and a bunch that were less comfortable. But I think we're back in the this is pretty scary and stuff needs to be precise again. I will also say, as a last thing, I've said often that someone allows 2 or 3 presses against them, like seriously dangerous positions, they're going to lose. Like, no one seems to defend these more than a few times in a row. And while you could argue the solver has disliked his play in them, stuff has survived way more than anyone is surviving presses like this and against a top-rate opponent, and that is really, really impressive.